Okay, let's dive right into this. Welcome to The Explainer, where today we are unpacking the incredibly rich, meticulously crafted universe of Claudia D. Reid's Burn After Spitting. Now, we're looking at a story that actually starts out as a gritty Queen's crime noir, a very grounded police procedural, but it escalates literally breath by breath into this absolutely mind-bending cosmic mystery. We are talking about the ultimate crisis of identity here. It's a multiversal phenomenon, but it's not spreading through wormholes or high-tech portals like you might expect. No. It's spreading through the most intimate, mundane human interactions. So let's just get right into it and see how this terrifying yet weirdly beautiful story unfolds.
So think about this. What if you actually remember dying? The story hooks you immediately with this chilling prologue set in a 2035 Montreal hotel room. We meet Dr. Landon Mason. He's checked in under a false name, on the run from some shadow protocol. He steps into the shower, and suddenly, completely out of nowhere, he is flooded with memories of a life he has never lived. He's hearing a woman weeping in a language he doesn't speak. He remembers holding a police badge that definitely isn't Canadian. And then he experiences the cold, undeniable certainty that he has already died. Before he can even process what's happening, he collapses. And then a literal fixer just walks in, erases every single trace of his existence from that room, and he vanishes. It is such a gripping hook, and it tells us right out of the gate, in this universe, memory is a lethal weapon.
Part 1. The Mystery in Queens. Now, to really understand that endgame in Montreal, we've got to rewind a few years to late 2032. We transition away from this global shadow conspiracy and get right down to the grounded, day-to-day police work of detectives Jason Mahoney and Michelle Lawler out in the 105th Precinct. They start noticing this series of just totally bizarre domestic disputes across Queens Village. Suspects aren't just acting erratically, they're genuinely claiming to possess memories of lives they never lived in this timeline. At first, it just feels like some sort of localized madness, right? But as Mahoney points out, there is a distinct, terrifying pattern taking root. A prime example of this is Mr. Torres. He violently smashes his wedding photo. And why? Because his brain is suddenly flooded with these vivid, agonizing regrets from an alternate timeline where he never actually married his wife. He's yelling at her about affairs that literally didn't happen in this universe. And he tells her, "I was a better man there, kinder. I didn't hit her." The real tragedy here is that the infection doesn't just bring madness. It brings this profound, heartbreaking awareness of the choices we didn't make and the better versions of ourselves that we somehow left behind.
So let's formally define what these detectives are actually dealing with. It's known as a memory bleed. And it's crucial to understand these aren't just hallucinations. They are tangible, real-world upgrades. Like, Mr. Torres suddenly knows exactly how to repair his broken boiler, step by step, even though he has never touched it before in his life. You have a kid in the neighborhood who suddenly knows every complex chess opening without ever having played a single game. Someone else is suddenly playing the guitar flawlessly. The infection is literally importing real, verifiable skills and memories from parallel alternate timelines right into the current host.
Part 2. Anatomy of the Spread. Now, what's really interesting about this is how this massive cosmic multiversal phenomenon actually travels. It's in the most mundane way possible, entirely through saliva. Like I said, no glowing dimensional rifts in the sky. We're talking about a cough, a shared drink, a kiss on the cheek. The spit of the mouth is the literal bridge between worlds here. Let's walk through the terrifyingly intimate progression of this bleed. It happens in 3 distinct steps. First up, you have exposure. Jason and Michelle's partner, Detective Bobby Newman, gets exposed, and it just starts with this wet, ragged cough. Then comes step 2, crowding. Bobby starts hearing the voices of his alternate selves, specifically this version of him who was a heroic firefighter that died saving a child. The host's original mind instinctively resists this, which leads to massive paranoia and honestly some real physical body horror. Bobby's skin actually begins to crack and weep this shimmering fluid. And finally, you hit step 3, consensus. This is where the original personality just stops fighting and fully merges with the alternate fragments. Bobby embraces that heroic firefighter within him. He finds peace, but he entirely loses his original self in the process.
The medical community's reaction to all of this is absolutely fascinating. Let's contrast traditional virology against what's happening here, which they call multiversal integration. So Dr. Liam Schell, this quiet neighborhood doctor, starts secretly hoarding these saliva samples. And when he puts them under a microscope, he realizes something crazy. The infected cells aren't attacking the host like a normal virus would. They aren't decaying. Instead, they are intentionally organizing. Dr. Schell literally watches through his lens as these cellular clusters form the shapes of tiny, smiling human faces. The infection isn't invading to destroy the host, it's arriving fully formed. It's not a sickness, it's a migration.
But, science is really only half the story here.
This explainer wouldn't be complete without looking at the spiritual perspective. Enter Rabbi Jacob Nickel. He opens up ancient texts from the Zohar to reframe this biological infection as a profound spiritual event. In his words, the spit of the mouth became the bridge. He actually calls it a confusion of breath. From the rabbi's perspective, this isn't a disease at all. It's an ancient longing. It's fractured human souls from across the multiverse seeking to finally reunite and become completely whole.
Part 3. The first complete merge.
Of course, every outbreak has to have an epicenter. And here, it's Tina, known affectionately as Miss Queen's Village. She's the beating heart of the community. She organizes local events, she hugs everyone, she gives casual cheek kisses to neighbors. Without knowing it, she is the primary vector spreading this phenomenon everywhere she goes, and yet she is entirely untouched by the panic or the physical sickness. Crucially, when she touches people who are suffering from that crowding stage of their alternate selves, she instantly calms them down. The massive revelation here is that Tina isn't patient zero. She is the endpoint. Years ago, she actually underwent the very first successful merge. She acts as a complete vessel, a multiversal blueprint who just peacefully holds all these versions of herself without fracturing. She doesn't fight those multiversal echoes. She simply has room for all of them.
If we look at the spectrum of reactions to the infection, we see some really distinct stances across the cast. You have Bobby Newman, who is physically cracking before willingly adapting. Then there's Toby Mack, a local gym instructor carrying a much slower variant. His clients actually experience this deep, peaceful merge that brings them profound relief. Tina Sample, like we just discussed, is the welcoming blueprint. But then, look down at the bottom row, Dr. Land Mason, representing the CDC. His reaction is strict eradication. His stance, scorched earth. Because to the authorities, any merging of timelines is an absolute existential threat to human identity that simply has to be wiped out.
Part 4. Scorched Earth Protocol. This is where the narrative just wildly escalates. The NYPD entirely collapses because cops start remembering past life grudges against one another. Basic law and order just disintegrates. So in steps Dr. Land Mason and his heavily armed CDC team. They commandeer the precinct, turning this from a localized neighborhood mystery into a full-blown dystopian nightmare. And they step in with a terrifying historical precedent. If we trace this back, in 2029 there was a major lab incident in Geneva. An infected researcher spat on a colleague. That colleague suddenly remembered a parallel timeline where the researcher had assassinated him, so he killed the researcher right there in the lab to settle a multiversal score. A shadow committee was formed that exact night. Then you have 2032, which is the Queen's Village outbreak we're currently tracking, and 2035 is that Montreal cleanup operation where the story first opened. The CDC knows this migration settles generational multiversal debts in blood.
So the crucial point is the ruthless application of the protocol itself, the burn after spitting rules. Isolate all transmission zones, destroy any contaminated physical materials, erase all public records. And the absolute darkest rule, eradicate persistent high-load carriers. The authorities are literally setting Queen's Village on fire to preserve a fractured, isolated version of reality. They are burning people alive to stop the multiverse from stitching itself back together.
Which brings us to this really chilling statistic. 68%. The CDC runs their scans and they determine that Bobby Newman's alternate multiversal heroic fragment now controls 68% of his brain activity. His original personality is basically just background static at this point. And because he is a high-load carrier who is almost completely merged, the CDC marks Bobby as a primary target for immediate incineration.
Part 5. The existential choice.
We are now entering the final act of this explainer. The climax of Burn After Spitting really evolves from just being a physical survival thriller against guys in hazmat suits into this profound philosophical battle for the future of the human species. On one side, you have Dr. Mason saying, "It's an invasion, burn it out." It represents the pure terror of human identity and individuality being completely replaced. But on the other side, you have Tina Sample, "It's a reunion, let it in." It is the spiritual hope of humanity finally curing its cosmic loneliness, becoming whole, and connecting with every single choice we ever regretted making.
As the CDC fires are raging outside, we return to Rabbi Nickel for what is easily one of the most poignant moments in the entire story. Standing in a synagogue, he absolutely refuses to run. Instead, he willingly opens his mind to the voice of his great-great-grandfather, a victim of the Holocaust, and he merges with his ancestors' courage and forgiveness. He tells his congregation, "They are coming because they are afraid of what we are becoming. But fear is temporary, wholeness is forever." He accepts the merge entirely. And this brings us to the ultimate crossroads for our protagonist, Detective Michelle Lawler. It's the extinction of individuality versus a collective multiversal consciousness. Her own sister becomes infected, and Michelle is faced with this impossible, heartbreaking decision. Does she follow the CDC protocol and report her sister to be burned, preserving her original self, or does she abandon absolutely everything to protect her? Michelle ultimately chooses to let her sister merge. She embraces the dissolution of their isolated identities to save the people she loves, realizing that letting the fragments in might actually be the only way to truly be whole.
And that leaves us right here, with the final question of this explainer staring right back at you. If you could suddenly remember the skills, the loves, and the deep, deep regrets of a better version of yourself, would you fight it just to remain exactly who you are right now? Or would you let it in, knowing you might lose yourself to become complete? It's a lingering dilemma that questions the very nature of who we are. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive. Think carefully about your answer, and I'll see you on the next explainer.